Jacob didn't know why, but something about Clara's words stayed with him long after she had left the room. Maybe it was the way she said it, like she wasn't trying to fix him, just offering something real, or maybe it was because deep down, he was tired of being numb. Still, the idea of meeting a dog didn't make sense to him. He wasn't the kind of person who needed emotional support. At least, that's what he told himself. But that night, as the rain tapped against the rehab center's windows, Jacob found himself thinking about the dog more than the accident. He imagined the dog sitting quietly beside him, not talking, not asking questions, just ... Being there, it wasn't a comforting thought, exactly, but it wasn't a painful one either. And for Jacob, that was progress. The next morning, Clara returned. She didn't mention dogs again right away. Instead, she talked about random things like how her own brother had broken his leg in high school, or how the coffee machine in the lobby always gave her the wrong order. Her presence was calm and steady, like a friend who didn't need anything from him. Finally, before leaving, she said, "I'll be at the shelter on Saturday. They have a few dogs who really need someone, no pressure, but if you want, come. See what it's like." Jacob didn't respond. He didn't nod or shake his head, but later, when his mom came to visit, he surprised her by asking a simple question: "Can we go somewhere Saturday?" Diane's face lit up with a mix of shock and hope. "Anywhere you want." And so, that Saturday morning, Jacob found himself being wheeled into a small, warm-smelling animal shelter on the edge of town. The air was filled with quiet barking, the sound of paws on linoleum floors, and soft voices from volunteers trying to comfort the animals. Clara met them at the door with a gentle smile. "Glad you came," she said. Jacob didn't say much as they moved past rows of kennels. Some dogs barked excitedly, others sat quietly, eyes watching his every move. He felt strangely nervous, like he was being interviewed by a room full of strangers who couldn't speak. Then they stopped in front of a kennel near the back. Inside was a skinny, older-looking dog with a patchy coat and a noticeable limp. The sign on his kennel read, "Scout returned 3 times. Needs patience." Jacob stared at him for a long moment. The dog didn't bark, he didn't beg or whine. Instead, he just stood up slowly, limped to the front of the kennel, and sat down. His eyes locked with Jacob's, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't pity, it wasn't sadness, it was recognition. "What happened to him?" Jacob asked, his voice hoarse. "He was found injured near the railroad tracks," Clara said quietly. "He's been adopted a few times, but no one kept him. Said he was too slow, too scared, too much work." Jacob looked down at his own legs. Then back at the dog. Can I sit with him?" Clara nodded. "I'll bring him to the meet and greet room." A few minutes later, Scout limped into the room, sniffed around, and then slowly made his way over to Jacob. He didn't jump. He didn't bark. He simply sat beside the wheelchair and gently rested his head on Jacob's footrest. Jacob felt his throat tighten. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel like a patient or a problem. He felt seen. And without thinking, he whispered, "Hey, buddy." Scout thumped his tail softly. In the corner, Diane wiped her eyes. Clara smiled but said nothing. No one dared speak, because in that quiet room, 2 broken souls had just found each other and no one wanted to interrupt the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Jacob returned to the rehab center in the weeks after meeting Scout, but something had changed. He still sat in his wheelchair with the same quiet determination, yet now there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. The silence that had engulfed him since the accident was slowly, almost imperceptibly, being replaced by a curiosity about life beyond the hospital walls. Scout's gentle presence at the shelter had stirred something inside him, a longing for connection he hadn't known he still possessed. Each visit to the shelter became a cherished ritual. At first, Jacob would watch Scout from afar, his gaze lingering on the dog as Scout padded carefully around the room, tail wagging in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Then, one afternoon, Jacob mustered the courage to roll closer. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out to stroke Scout's soft ears. The contact was tentative, almost hesitant, but it marked the first time Jacob had let someone in without fear of being hurt. The brief moment of warmth between them was like a gentle reminder that sometimes vulnerability could lead to healing. Diane noticed the change right away. During home visits, she saw Jacob's eyes brighten ever so slightly when he spoke about Scout. He's like a friend who listens without judgment, Jacob explained in a quiet voice one evening, his words slow and deliberate. Diane smiled through her tears, feeling hopeful that her son was beginning to rebuild the parts of himself that had seemed irretrievably broken. Even if Jacob still struggled to speak beyond murmurs, his actions said more than words ever could. The rehab center, once a place where Jacob felt like a prisoner of his own body, now held hints of possibility. Therapists observed his new enthusiasm during sessions, where tasks that used to seem insurmountable were approached with a sense of quiet resolve. One therapist noted, "It's as if there's a spark in him that wasn't there before." Jacob was slowly learning that progress wasn't measured solely by the movement of his limbs but by the reopening of his heart. Scout, too, played his role in breaking down Jacob's defenses. The dog's steady presence reminded him that being different, whether by circumstance or appearance, did not preclude warmth or affection. Every time Scout rested his head on Jacob's lap or nudged his hand with a gentle paw, it was as if the dog was saying, "I'm here, and I care." These silent affirmations began to chip away at the walls Jacob had so carefully built over the months of isolation. One rainy afternoon, as Jacob sat by the large window in the rehab center, he watched the droplets race down the glass. The rhythmic sound of raindrops was interrupted only by the soft padding of Scout's steps as the shelter volunteer brought the dog along for one of their scheduled visits. Jacob's initial reaction was a stiff, guarded posture. He hadn't expected Scout to come inside that day, and the sudden proximity jolted him. However, as Scout circled the room and eventually settled by his side, Jacob felt an unexpected sense of calm. It was as though Scout's quiet acceptance was inviting Jacob to let go of some of the fears that had kept him confined for so long. The volunteer later remarked that the bond between Jacob and Scout was something even she hadn't witnessed before. It was subtle yet powerful, a deep, unspoken understanding that neither of them was ever truly alone. This connection encouraged Jacob to start opening up, not just to Scout but to the people around him as well. He began participating in small group activities at the center, engaging in conversations that he had once shunned. His laughter, though rare, began to echo softly in the common room, a sound that was both healing and promising. Diane and the therapists watched in amazement as Jacob's hardened exterior slowly softened. The protective walls he had built in the wake of his accident were crumbling, replaced by fragile bridges of trust and companionship. And at the heart of this transformation was a rejected shelter dog who had found a way to reach a paralyzed teen's soul. In those quiet moments of understanding, Jacob began to believe that even in the darkest times, connection could light the way forward. This was only the beginning, a sign that hope, however small, could defy even the deepest despair. Clara had always believed in small miracles. She wasn't a doctor or a therapist, but she had spent years watching quiet moments turn into breakthroughs, especially when animals were involved. She had seen veterans with trauma begin to speak again, elderly patients laugh for the first time in months, and lonely children smile because of a wagging tail. But there was something different about Jacob and Scout. Their bond wasn't just about comfort, it was about reflection. They didn't just need each other. They saw themselves in one another. After a month of visits, Clara sat with Diane one afternoon in the rehab center cafeteria. She stirred her coffee slowly before leaning forward. "I've been thinking," she said. "There's a new therapy pilot program that partners patients with shelter animals on a trial basis. It's not permanent, but it allows the patient to care for the animal while continuing treatment. I think Jacob and Scout would be a perfect match." Diane blinked. "He'd bring Scout home." "Yes, for a few weeks at first, under supervision. We'd help with the adjustment, make sure both of them are comfortable." Diane hesitated, the mother in her worrying about responsibility, about Jacob's mental state, about whether he was ready. But then she remembered the way her son had smiled when Scout laid his head in his lap, how he had spoken more in the past few weeks than in the past few months. Maybe this was the step forward he needed. Jacob, however, was uncertain. When Clara brought it up later, he stared at her, unsure how to respond. "Bring him home," he repeated. "Only if you want to," Clara said gently. "You've already started helping him. Maybe he can help you, too." Jacob looked down at his lap. The thought of Scout in his room, lying on the rug beside his bed, following him through the house, it felt strange, almost unreal. He was used to machines, scheduled checkups, the scent of hand sanitizer. What would it be like to wake up and have something else to care about? Something that wasn't a reminder of pain. After a long pause, he nodded once. I want to try. Within a week, Scout was brought to Jacob's home. The shelter provided food, a bed, and training materials. Diane helped arrange a small corner in the living room with Scout's essentials. Jacob's room was adjusted so that Scout could sleep nearby, and a low bowl of water was placed near the foot of the wheelchair ramp. On their first day together, Scout wandered slowly through the house, sniffing everything with calm curiosity. When he came across Jacob's wheelchair, he paused, then gently rested his head on Jacob's knee. Jacob didn't say anything, he just smiled and reached down to scratch behind Scout's ear. They quickly settled into a rhythm. In the mornings, Jacob helped brush Scout's coat, holding the brush awkwardly but steadily in his hand. Diane watched from the kitchen, holding back tears as her son, once buried in silence, softly encouraged Scout with phrases like good boy and almost done. With Scout around, Jacob began to take his physical therapy more seriously. Not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to be strong enough to feed Scout, to open the door for him, to take him outside. He even practiced moving over thresholds and ramps just so he could follow Scout into the backyard. One afternoon, while they were sitting outside, Jacob turned to his mother and said, I forgot what fresh air felt like. Diane blinked away. Tarzan nodded. It's even better with a friend beside you. Jacob looked down at Scout, who was dozing with his head on Jacob's footrest. Yeah, Jacob whispered. It is. And just like that, what had once seemed impossible hope, healing, and quiet joy was beginning to bloom in the small, unassuming moments shared between a paralyzed teen and a dog no one else had wanted. It was a cloudy Saturday morning when Jacob rolled into the shelter for the first time. He didn't speak much on the ride there, only nodding when Diane asked if he was feeling okay. Deep down, he wasn't sure what he was expecting. The last few months had taken so much from him, his strength, his identity, even his sense of direction. So when Clara had suggested visiting a dog shelter, it had sounded like just another distraction. But now, sitting in the main room surrounded by the muffled barking of animals, Jacob felt something else. Not excitement, not fear. Maybe curiosity. Clara met them at the entrance and offered Jacob a warm smile. Thanks for coming, she said. I want you to meet someone. They moved slowly past rows of kennels. Some dogs barked loudly, leaping at the bars in playful bursts. Others watched quietly from corners, their eyes tired but hopeful. Jacob glanced at them but said nothing. Then, near the back of the shelter, Clara stopped in front of a kennel with no barking, no movement, just a calm presence sitting patiently. Inside. This is Scout, she said. Scout was a medium-sized lab mix with patches of missing fur along his side and a long, jagged scar that ran from his shoulder to his back leg. His right hind leg was slightly twisted, giving him an uneven stance. He wasn't flashy or energetic. He didn't jump or wag his tail in bursts like the others. He just looked up, quietly, and locked eyes with Jacob. Jacob stared back, and sure, why he couldn't look away. He's been returned 3 times, Clara said softly. Some people said he was too shy. Others thought he was too damaged. He doesn't trust quickly, but he has a good heart. He just needs someone to see him. Jacob looked down at his lap. He thought of his own body, how it refused to do what it once could, how people looked at him differently now, some with pity, others with discomfort. He understood what it meant to be seen as broken. He looked up again at Scout. Can I sit with him? Jacob asked. Clara smiled gently. Absolutely. Let's bring him into the meet and greet room. A few minutes later, Scout was led into a quiet space with a single couch, a chair, and enough room for Jacob's wheelchair. Scout moved slowly, cautiously sniffing the corners. He paused when he saw Jacob, then walked forward, his gait uneven but steady. Jacob remained still, unsure what to do. He had never been close to a dog like this. Scout stopped at his side, sniffed his shoes, then the side of the chair. After a moment, he gently placed his chin on the footrest, letting out a soft sigh. Jacob froze. He glanced at Diane, who had her hand over her mouth. Clara remained by the door, watching quietly. Jacob looked back at Scout. The dog's eyes were deep and steady, holding none of the nervousness Jacob felt. Hey, Jacob whispered. Scout's single quotes' tail gave a small wag. Jacob reached out slowly, his hand brushing the top of Scout's head. The dog didn't flinch or move away. Instead, he leaned into the touch. Jacob let out a shaky breath, surprised by how natural it felt. They sat like that for several minutes. No words, no movement, just quiet understanding. He doesn't usually do that, Clara said after a while. He never makes the first move. Especially not like that. Jacob didn't respond right away. His eyes were still on Scout. Maybe he knows what it's like, he said quietly. To feel like you don't belong. Scout thumped his tail again. And in that small, silent room, something powerful was happening. A boy who had lost faith in his future had just found a reason to hope. And a dog who had been discarded more than once had finally found someone who saw his worth. They weren't fixed. They weren't whole, but in that moment, they didn't need to be. They had each other. The first few days of having Scout at home felt like adjusting to a new rhythm, one Jacob hadn't experienced in a long time. Mornings used to begin with a heavy silence, with Jacob lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a reason to move. But now, there was the soft sound of Scout's tail thumping against the wall, the quiet patting of his paws as he came to nuzzle Jacob's hand. He didn't bark or whine. He didn't demand anything. He simply showed up, every morning, with gentle presence and quiet loyalty. Jacob started to move more, not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to feed Scout on his own, even if it meant fumbling with the bag of kibble and spilling some on the floor. He wanted to take Scout to the backyard, even if it meant navigating the ramp slowly and awkwardly in his wheelchair. Every task, once a reminder of what he couldn't do, became a small victory when Scout was by his side. Diane watched from a distance, careful not to interrupt. It was the first time in months that her son had shown a spark of independence. She quietly helped where needed, refilling Scout's water bowl, brushing his coat when Jacob got tired, but she made sure Jacob felt like Scout was truly his. At physical therapy, Jacob surprised his team. He asked for exercises that helped with upper body strength. He wanted to practice reaching down, lifting lightweight items, and maneuvering around tighter spaces. When asked why, he simply said, "I need to take care of someone now." His therapist, Lisa, smiled. "That's the best reason I've heard all week." Scout accompanied Jacob to some of the sessions. At first, the staff was unsure how it would work, but they quickly saw the effect. Scout would sit quietly beside Jacob's chair, watching him work, occasionally nudging his elbow with encouragement. The connection between them was something no exercise machine could match. It brought motivation from a place deeper than discipline. It came from love. One afternoon, Jacob and Scout were in the backyard. The air was warm, the trees swayed gently, and the sky was a soft shade of blue. Jacob had a tennis ball in his lap. He held it out, smiling slightly. "You want it?" he asked. Scout perked up, his ears twitching. Jacob rolled the ball across the grass with a shaky motion. Scout took off, his limp barely slowing him down. He chased it with joyful determination and brought it back, tail wagging proudly. Jacob laughed, a full, genuine laugh that surprised even himself. Diane, watching from the kitchen window, covered her mouth with her hand. She hadn't heard that sound in nearly a year. Later that evening, Jacob wheeled himself into the living room where Scout lay sprawled across the rug. He reached down and scratched behind Scout's ears. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I was the one helping you." Scout looked up with sleepy eyes, then rested his head on Jacob's foot again. Jacob smiled. The bond they shared was deeper than words. It was built in small moments, shared silences, soft touches, the gentle act of showing up day after day. It didn't matter that Scout had a limp or that Jacob couldn't walk. What mattered was that they had stopped seeing each other's brokenness. They only saw loyalty, trust, and the quiet strength it took to keep going. Jacob began writing about Scout in a small notebook Clara had given him. Not full journal entries, just little things like "Scout caught the ball today, even though he stumbled," or "Scout sat by me the whole time during therapy." Over time, the notebook filled with moments of joy, resilience, and healing. And without even realizing it, Jacob was telling the story of how a dog helped him put his life back together, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. Jacob never liked the word therapy. Before the accident, it sounded like something other people needed, something for the weak or the broken. After the accident, it felt more like a punishment. Long sessions in cold rooms, strangers trying to push him to feel better, to move, to accept. He had hated all of it. But now, sitting outside under the sun with Scout by his side, Jacob realized that therapy didn't have to look like hospital walls and measured exercises. Sometimes, healing came in the form of muddy paws and quiet companionship. Every morning, Scout greeted Jacob with soft eyes and a tail wag that said, "You're not alone." He followed Jacob around the house, never too far, always alert. When Jacob struggled to reach something or felt frustrated, Scout would rest his head on Jacob's lap, grounding him with his calm. It was a language without words, a bond made of simple presence. Jacob's therapist, Lisa, quickly noticed the change. "He's different," she told Diane during a private check-in. "He's not just doing the exercises anymore, he's working towards something. There's a purpose behind every movement now." Diane nodded, eyes shining. "It's Scout," she said. He gave Jacob a reason. With Scout around, Jacob began to take risks. He started trying to get dressed on his own again. He practiced transferring from the chair to the couch without assistance. And for the first time since the accident, he wanted to cook just something small. So one Saturday morning, Diane stood close by as Jacob clumsily cracked 2 eggs into a bowl, scrambled them, and called Scout over. "Breakfast's ready," Jacob said with a proud grin. Scout sat patiently, waiting for his bowl. Jacob set it down carefully. Scout ate with the joy of a king, tail wagging, while Jacob watched with a quiet satisfaction. Outside the house, people started noticing the change too. Neighbors who hadn't seen Jacob in months were surprised to see him wheeling Scout down the sidewalk. Kids waved. Some even came over to pet Scout, who sat proudly beside Jacob like he knew he had a job to do. Jacob didn't mind the attention anymore. He smiled. He spoke. He was slowly reclaiming his voice. One day, Clara visited with a special request. "We're hosting a presentation at your school," she said. "We're inviting people to talk about how therapy animals change lives. I think you and Scout should be there." Jacob hesitated. School meant people, lots of them. People who had last seen him walking through the halls with a jersey on his back and confidence in his step. Now, they'd see the wheelchair. They'd see the new Jacob. He looked down at Scout, who was lying at his feet, chewing lazily on a toy. "What would I even say?" Jacob asked. "Just the truth," Clara replied. "Tell them about Scout. About you." He thought about it for a long time. That night, he sat in bed, Scout curled up at his side. Jacob opened his notebook and began writing. He didn't write about the accident. He wrote about the first day he met Scout. The quiet eyes, the paw on the footrest, the small things that slowly brought him back to life. He wrote until the page was full. The day of the presentation came quickly. Diane drove him to the school, his old school, where the halls were now lined with banners and familiar faces. Nerves tugged at his chest, but Scout walked beside him, steady and calm. When Jacob rolled onto the stage, there was a quiet gasp from the crowd. Many hadn't seen him in months, but as he took the microphone, Scout sitting tall at his side, Jacob smiled. "I lost a lot after the accident," he began. "But then I met someone who didn't care that I couldn't walk. He didn't see what was missing. He just saw me." Scout wagged his tail once. Jacob looked at him and said, "And because of that, I started seeing myself again too." The gymnasium was packed. Rows of metal folding chairs filled the floor, students whispering, teachers checking clipboards, and parents milling about with cups of coffee in hand. Banners reading "Therapy Animals, Healing in Motion" hung above the stage. It was a celebration of hope, but for Jacob Winters, it was a test of courage. He hadn't been back to his school since the accident. Once the star quarterback, he used to walk these halls with a confident grin and a crowd of teammates behind him. Now, he wheeled through them in silence, Scout walking faithfully beside him. Some students stared, some looked away, unsure of what to say, but Jacob didn't shrink. He focused on Scout, whose calm eyes and steady pace gave him strength. Clara met him near the entrance to the stage. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just speak from your heart," she said. "They're here to listen." Jacob nodded. He had rehearsed his speech for days, but now it felt like words might fail him. Yet when he looked at Scout, tail wagging, sitting tall as if he too knew the importance of the moment, Jacob felt calm wash over him. The principal stepped forward. "Our next speaker is someone many of you know. He's a student, a friend, and a young man who's shown us all what resilience truly means. Please welcome Jacob Winters." And Scout. The applause was immediate but gentle, respectful. Jacob rolled onto the stage slowly, Scout walking beside him. As they reached the microphone, The room grew quiet. Hundreds of eyes were watching, but Jacob didn't flinch. He cleared his throat. Some of you probably remember me differently, he began. I used to be on the field, used to walk these halls. Used to think I had everything figured out. His voice was steady, but soft. Then, life changed. In one moment, everything I thought I was disappeared. I didn't know who I was without the game, without walking, without control. And for a long time, I didn't want to know. I shut everyone out. He paused and looked down at Scout, who lay quietly at his feet, eyes on Jacob as if he understood every word. Then I met Scout, a shelter dog no one wanted. They said he was too damaged, too slow, too hard to train. But when I looked at him, I didn't see any of that. I saw someone like me. Someone trying. There was a rustle in the crowd. Someone sniffled. Someone else wiped their eyes. Scout didn't ask me to be perfect. He didn't care that I couldn't walk. He just showed up. Every day. He gave me purpose when I didn't think I had one anymore. He taught me that healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming someone new, someone stronger. The silence in the room deepened. Even the usual fidgeting of students had stopped. Jacob smiled faintly and reached down to scratch Scout behind the ears. He saved me. And I think, in a way, I saved him too. There was a pause, and then applause erupted across the gym. Not the polite kind, real, heartfelt, thundering applause. Students stood, teachers clapped with tears in their eyes, and even the principal dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. Jacob looked out over the crowd and nodded, not with pride, but with peace. After the presentation, students came forward one by one. Some wanted to pet Scout, others just wanted to say thank you. One girl, a freshman, quietly told Jacob, "My brother's in a wheelchair too." I didn't think anyone understood, but you do. Jacob reached out and held her hand for a moment. "Tell him he's not alone," he said. As the gym emptied, Jacob stayed behind for a few minutes, sitting in the quiet with Scout. "We did it," he whispered. Scout thumped his tail twice. In that moment, Jacob didn't feel like the boy who lost everything anymore. He felt like the young man who had found something even greater. Spring came slowly that year, but for Jacob, it felt like the world was blooming all over again. The days were brighter, the air softer, and his heart, once buried under the weight of loss, felt light for the first time in what seemed like forever. He and Scout had become inseparable partners in a quiet journey neither of them had planned, but both had come to cherish. The story of their bond had spread further than Jacob ever expected. Local news stations aired the clip from his school presentation. A community magazine wrote an article titled "Boy and Dog Heal Together." Letters started arriving, handwritten notes from strangers who had watched the story online. One woman wrote, "I've been in a wheelchair for 2 years and thought no one understood. You gave me hope." Another said, "My dog is my reason, too." Jacob read every one. He kept them in a shoebox beside his bed, next to Scout's leash and the small notebook where he still wrote down little moments that mattered. Things like, "Scout barked at the mailman today for the first time," or "We made it to the top of the trail, me in the chair, him beside me. We rested. We watched the clouds." Clara continued to visit, though now she came as more of a friend than a volunteer. One afternoon, she sat on the porch with Jacob and Diane, Scout dozing at their feet. "There's an opening at the shelter," Clara said. "A part-time volunteer assistant, someone to help with outreach, meet and greets, maybe even a few school visits." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "You mean me? If you want it," she smiled. "You're already doing the work. Might as well wear a name tag." Jacob glanced at Scout, who opened one eye, then promptly closed it again as if to say, "Well, of course it should be you." "I'd like that," Jacob said. "A lot." Working at the shelter gave Jacob a new kind of purpose. He spoke to kids, teens, and even adults who had experienced their own kind of pain. He introduced them to animals who, like Scout, had been overlooked or misunderstood. He watched as shy hands reached out to trembling paws and saw the same kind of healing begin that had changed his life. He was no longer just the boy who survived an accident. He was a mentor, a guide, a storyteller, and Scout. Scout had found his forever home. Gone were the days of rejection and return. He now had his own bed by Jacob's side, a toy basket that overflowed, and a backyard where he chased squirrels with dignified laziness. He walked a little slower now, but with pride, as if he knew exactly what he had done, not just for Jacob, but for everyone who had heard their story. One evening, Diane sat with Jacob on the back porch as the sun dipped below the trees. They watched Scout chase fireflies, swatting the air with his paw before trotting back to lie beside Jacob's chair. "I was so scared we'd lost you," Diane said quietly. Jacob nodded. "I was, too." They sat in silence for a while before he added, "But Scout found me before I could disappear completely." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "And you found each other right when you needed it most." The stars came out slowly. Jacob looked up, feeling the cool breeze on his face, Scout's soft breathing beside him. "I used to think everything ended with that accident," Jacob said. "Now I realize it just started something different, not less. Just different." In the dark, Scout let out a soft sigh, as if agreeing with every word. And as Jacob closed his eyes, he no longer dreamed of who he used to be. He dreamed of who he was becoming, strong, open-hearted, and never alone. The end.